Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this IGeLU-ELUNA town hall presentation and discussion on linked data in discovery. What is possible, what is needed, and what needs to change. Sorry. I'm Ken Varnum, Senior Program Manager at the University of Michigan Library and a member of the Linked Open Data Working Group. And I'm very pleased to moderate this panel discussion today. As we get going, I'd like to remind everybody that to please mute yourselves unless you're speaking during the question and answer period at the end. This session is being recorded for the benefit of those who were not able to make this time of day or otherwise unable to attend or want to go back and relive the good times. We're going to start today with a brief overview of the IGeLU-ELUNA Linked Open Data Working Group, and then we'll move into our 3 panel presentations, which will go in turn. That will be followed by questions and answers. There is a Google Doc, which I'm putting the link to in the chat. And please feel free to add things to that as the presentation goes on, or at the end, we will also use the Zoom chat feature, which depending on your, what kind of device you're using is the little chat bubble. Feel free to type questions in there. We'll go through the Google Doc first and then go through the chat, and I'll pose questions. And then if there's time at the end and anybody wants to, follow up on a question or add to the discussion, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. If things get a little bit too discussion oriented, I'll ask people to raise hands and we'll try to go in turn just to keep the conversation flowing. I will pass it over to Xiaoli Li to talk briefly about the Linked Open Data Working Group and its role in the Ex Libris universe. Xiaoli Li?
Thank you, Ken. Can you hear me? Good. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Well, depends on where you're from. So I'm very glad to see many of you are interested in our second town hall meeting. You may remember we had one back in December last year, was more about transition from a MARC to BibFrame and then from BibFrame to MARC. So following that very successful meeting, we thought this one we will focus on discovery. In case you don't know, this working group is a joint group of IGeLU and ELUNA users community. So our focus is basically helping and advocating the building the linked open data features into ARMA or other Ex Libris products. So far we have been working with you and collect your user story and use cases, and also work with other Ex Libris users group to collaborate basically the effort to help develop the linked open data. So we are basically is a group, hopefully working for you. So if you have any needs, any sort of thoughts, please feel free to share with us, so we can at least help to convey those suggestions to either other working groups or to Ex Libris directly if it's appropriate. We have several communication channels. So since you joined us, I assume you're probably on our listserv. But in addition, we do have a website, and occasionally we do put some updated information there. And most importantly, we would like you to send your linked data user stories or your user cases. So I think with that, I'm just very excited. We have a very 3 excellent speakers today. We'll talk about their user stories and what they have done, in helping their patrons to discover the information. With that, I'm turning to Ken.
Thank you, Xiaoli. I'll just briefly introduce our three speakers and then turn them over, turn the microphone over to each of them in turn. Our first presenter is TJ Kao, who is the head of metadata creation at UC Davis. Before UC Davis, he worked for numerous libraries, including Yale, George Washington University, Multnomah County Library, and the University of Connecticut. While he spends most of his time dealing with Mark 21 data, he has been exploring incorporating more linked data in his daily catalog. Our second presenter will be Steve Meyer, who is the data strategist for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Libraries. In this role, he works on a range of data projects from library policies for data and data governance, as well as technical projects like the linked data implementation that he's going to be showing us today. And last, but certainly not least, Katie Lam is the Associate Director of Library Services and Head Systems and Digital Services at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology Library. This library has a few linked data projects involving ALMA, Primo, Chinese Name Authority, Institutional Repository, and Digital Scholarship. Katie is the architect behind all of these initiatives. He is also a member of the IGeLU-ELUNA Linked Open Data Working Group, which, as Xiaoli noted, advises Ex Libris on implementing linked data capabilities. Now I'll stop sharing and pass it on to TJ.
Let me unmute myself. Well, good morning again, and thanks, Ken, for the very nice introduction. And my topic for today, for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about a use case of identification of a works expression manifestation in Primo. And a disclaimer first, I feel like I'm a little bit embarrassed because I don't think we really do too much at UC Davis yet, but I definitely, this is more like my wish list with the possibility of what I see in Primo. And, oh, I should just do a present mode, that would be better. So what triggered this kind of discussion is mostly because when I was still at my previous institution, I submit a use case about why linked data would be awesome to put in OMA, and why Ex Libris should go forward and do something with it. And because at that time, George Washington University has been doing lots of embedding URI work. At that time, the leader of the catalogers has been working really hard, using MarkEdit, so to really include the URIs for all the access points. So it becomes kind of daily routine for the catalogs at the GW. So at that time, I thought, well, so that's something that might be easier, for us to explore. So one of the things that we think about is that, so as a scholar, we can imagine that one of the things that they have to deal with is usually lots of kind of going for, especially for humanities, probably specific like literature scholars. They really want to know lots of addition, lots of translation, or different kind of things like that. So I think there might be something that catalogers can help, or maybe our discovery layer can help to really fill that need. So I'm going to next slide. And so this is a kind of Wuthering Heights, the very classic that everyone loves. I hope also very, very sad, but it's also a very great story. So out of curiosity, as an example, that I searched UC Davis Primo VE and just search it, and it turns out I got a result. And this is just the first seven results from the first page. Of course, there are lots of pages, but first, and this is the kind of result. And yes, Primo is definitely a very different kind of discovery from the before, like Voyager, that kind of environment. However, the result is still very traditional, right? You have the very brief, information display for each title, and then we just depend on the patron to figure out, the user to figure out which one they want. So I think I'm just gonna pretend I'm a very a little bit lazy, maybe I'm not really lazy, more like inexperienced user. And I was just like, oh Lord, how come there are so many results? How am I supposed to feel so, how am I to figure out which one is the one I want? And is there something that I can use it later, but not for now, for different purposes maybe? So that made me wonder that, is there something that we can really do with our data rather than just simply display the mark field in a very traditional way? And so I started digging into the bibliographic records. And here are some of the first blocks that shows that the two records are really the Emily Bronte's work. And, of course, very obvious they have the Bronte there, but for the kind of inexperienced user, they might look at that, why there are two kind of additional contributors, what is it about? So these are actually two editors, right? So each work has a different, I should say each manifestation has a different kind of editor or expression, a different editor. And when we look at the BIP of OCL's the BIP records, actually there's a 758 kind of work ID. And by looking at that, you immediately tell, oh, they are actually two same work because they share the same ID. But if you look at the second work, which is actually, there's a little hint to tell you that's a score. So that's definitely probably not someone who wants to study Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights original work, won't be interested in, but they will say, oh, okay. But by looking at this brief record, it's really hard to tell what is going on, right? So once you get into a brief record, it starts to give you more information. So for example, the 700, there's a relationship designator to express the relationship between this work and the original work. However, and of course, there's a 776 to tell you that, hey, there's other format that you can explore if you are interested. And again, there's a 758 to tell you that if patron look at that, oh, it's actually a different number from the original work. And the other thing is that, the other thing is that we're not really a kind of complaint, but so there's a kind of related title also kind of to express that there's another edition, to show that 776 that there's another format. But when you actually click on it, it just generates a title search. Yeah, so it's like, that is a better way to handle this rather than just a text string search. Then the last one is another work. It's a book with my height, but this time it's also very confusing. So this time the other author becomes the first author. Once you get into a record, you finally realize, oh, this is a play based on the original work. So, but then again, the ID actually tell you that it's a different work. So that makes me wonder that whether what we have really put in the BIP record should really help the patron to really make this discovery experience a little bit better, right? Rather than this kind of text string or lots of clicking, they have to click it into the record in order to see some stuff. So that just give me a light bulb. It's like, how about using the URIs we have already put in a record, and not just the bibliographic record, but also the authority data, because catalogs have been very religiously kind of adding those wonderful 3XX into the authority records, and lots of them are actually, they are from the control vocabulary, so they are probably, some of them have already got URIs ready to consume, and they are definitely more machine actionable, right? Rather than text string search or number search, that kind of thing. So, and of course, take advantage of a relationship designator catalogs put in there to really express it rather than just like, oh, well, okay, so it just not do anything with that data. That's kind of a shame. And that just made me wonder that if there is something that, of course, we can reinvent well, I shouldn't say reinvent well, there are something that Primo is already doing now, right? Like verbalization and also dedupe, that kind of thing to help patrons, but it's still very clicky and it's not really very dynamic. So that made me wonder whether there are some more dynamic kind of tools. And definitely there are some kind of example out there, like a Google Knowledge Graph. It's a little bit clicky, you still have to search in order to find the card, but hey, it's a little bit step forward than before. And of course, the author card is something that's very interesting to see that whether there's a possibility that would really rely on query, that kind of thing, and display in a record in some way. However, I want to back that whether it's possible that even those kind of things can happen at first screen. For example, I'm thinking the sky is the limit. And I think that maybe a cursor moved to a access point that have a UI embedded. maybe some kind of knowledge graph will pop up and give you some additional information. And windows pop up that has additional links that take you even further. Of course, this kind of technology, probably not really, I'm thinking about more like, now depending on the patient to click, whether the machine can be smarter that when people actually move around on the screen, then the server or the actual machine will immediately do something on the fly, query, that kind of thing, based on the URIs already present in the record. So I'm glad that the next speaker, Stephen, is going to talk about their experience using the AutoCAD. So that's pretty much what I have. But thank you for your attention, and I'm very looking forward to any kind of discussion and thanks.
Okay, hello. Let me get my slides presenting. Okay, let me know if you're, just please someone chime in if there's any trouble seeing my screen or hearing what I'm saying. So thank you for the invitation to talk about the knowledge card work that we have done. My name is Steve Meyer. I'm the data strategist at the UW-Madison Libraries, and we've had knowledge cards in our library catalog that are based on remote linked data sources for a couple of years now. So I just want to talk about kind of the philosophy behind this and the background, and do a couple of quick demos. So first off, for just a little bit more about what we were doing in our approach to how we would work with linked data on our campus. I'll share these slides because there's a number of links in them. But there's a write-up here. It's it's written by me. It's a little bit of a poorly written sort of blog post style thing, but it explains the philosophy that we have, that what we were focusing on with working with linked data is not all of the efforts that are going on around BibFrame, all of the things around data modeling and reimagining sort of what the future of MARC looks like. We were trying to think about, given a world in which we have these identifiers, these URIs, where we can link to data in the outside world, what would that enable us to do in discovery? So that's a brief overview of the philosophy behind it. So at a really high level, what our library catalog does is I sometimes call it a bibliographic description crawl or a linked data crawl. This is kind of the flow of what you're going to sort of see on the pages that I'll sort of demonstrate. At the center, we've got our library discovery interface. We're using a local search interface, but we are using the same feed, the publishing feed from Alma to Primo. We just are sort of listening in on a copy of that data as the publishing updates happen. And in there, we've enabled the LC name and subject identifiers to be present in that published data. So when that data is there, that means that it's accessible to our discovery index. From that, we're able to actually sort of resolve the URIs for the Library of Congress name authority file URIs. So we do this, and we do look at both the kind of personal, the main entry and added entry for sort of personal names coming from 100 and 700 fields, and also from the 600 fields from topical name entries. We take those URIs, we go over to VIAF, and then we've got some code, which there'll be a link to if anyone is interested in exploring it. We go over to VIAF, given an LCNAF URI, we resolve the VIAF entry, the entity in VIAF for that. And then from there, we can actually go to get to our sort of using VIAF as a data hub, we can get to a couple of other remote data sources where we pull in more information. And those are Getty vocabularies, Wikidata, and DBpedia. The latter two are both, machine readable linked data versions of Wikipedia data. So the concept here is, I like to sort of describe it as, if we're going to render a knowledge card, the data underlying it is sort of what I like to call a micrograph. It's a very small amount of triples that come from a diverse set of multiple sources. So as you can sort of see, this looks like a lot of data, but that's just because it's in the N-triple URI form. But all of these, this is, if you think about this just being a set of triples, that's not a lot of data that we can grab and render a knowledge card that sort of enhances the discovery. So like I said, the code is available in GitHub if anyone wants to use it. We use the Ruby on Rails framework for our discovery interface. So we've got a Ruby gem that we've also published to rubygems.org, but you can sort of see all the source here. So getting to some of these examples. So let me see here. Actually, let me go start here. So one of the ones, this is a book by the author Gertrude Stein. We've got our typical library catalog display of all the information. And then down towards the bottom, we've got this collapsible section, information from the web. We had a hard time coming up with a label for how to do this. We've got a little explanatory bubble that sort of explains why, what the source of this is. But then here's where we render our knowledge cards. So the first one for Gertrude Stein, in this case, here's the description from Getty, and here's the description from DBpedia. The one I tend to really like the ones from Getty because in that linked data model that they have at Getty, they do something that we librarians love. They cite their sources. So while it's pretty tricky to sort of parse through an RDF graph to get to the semantics of a citation, it's worth the effort in my view, just to be able to sort of practice what we preach in our library instruction sessions. So the information that we've chosen to display is generally something that we think will enhance or provide context about the author or subject of a work. So we do things like say, well, we're an academic institution, and so it's nice if we can sort of give the educational context of the author. One of the other ones, Wikidata does include some citations for some entries, but this is actually one of the things that we really love about this, which is this is asserting that Gertrude Stein was educated at Johns Hopkins. I don't know that she was educated at the School of Medicine. So this is one thing to note about this data that comes from sort of these remote sources. But when we get this kind of a citation, we can actually turn it into a link. We can actually then sort of rebroadcast that as a keyword search against our catalog and see, do we have this work? Do we have these items in our catalog? And so that's one of the kind of great use cases that sort of really works pretty well. One of the things that is obviously very good is other works by this author, comes in the notable works data from Wikidata. We do have some questions about this, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we sort of, DBpedia has these notions of like who was an influence on who in a sort of scholarly sense, and we display those kinds of things. These two things tend to be really interesting, though the provenance problems are something that we sort of have talked quite a bit about. So moving on to another example, this one I really find super interesting. So this is a book about the mathematician Euler. Euler appears as a subject heading in this particular record, and that's where we get the LCNAF ID that we can translate into a URI and go and resolve to get all this information. Most of this is not that interesting, but the notable works section really, really is to me. So one of our librarians in our special collections library said, hey, let's take a look at, we sort of pushed on this feature by sort of trying to go and explore and see what kinds of what kind of data was going to come back for these people as we displayed the knowledge cards. And we looked up Euler, and to our surprise, we didn't find works in the library sense of things that we'd have in our catalog. We found things like a reference to Euler's theorem, which is actually a super interesting concept, because that actually, I wasn't expecting to see that. It broke me out of the notion of like the library-centric notion of what is a notable work. Well, it's something that's actually published, or at least in some kind of tangible form, but I didn't think of it necessarily in exactly the same way as the abstraction of a theorem, an equation, or something like that. But these, again, we can take these assertions, rebroadcast them into our catalog, and provide more context, provide more discovery opportunities based on the data that we're getting back. The last one I'll show, this is Michael Pollan. I think he is a professor and a journalist, and he is a fairly famous author on topics around food. So one of the other things that for more recent authors that we sort of thought would be an interesting thing to do is to say, let's pull back film appearances. So this is, again, more information that our catalog data for a record about a book does not have about this author. What films did this author appear in? And again, rebroadcast that link and see that, look, oh, if someone is interested in this author, they can actually probably also find this film in our collections as well. And so for these kinds of things, this is enhancing the record with data that our bibliographic description doesn't have. And that has really been sort of like the entire philosophy for how we've approached this. I like to frame it around this phrase that's been repopularized recently by OCLC. I don't think they're doing a good enough job of citing the original authors, as far as I'm concerned, but I went to the UW-Madison Library School, now it's an iSchool, and they sort of talked about this a lot. This phrase that was coined by a former faculty member, Douglas Zweizig, this notion of the library in the life of the user rather than the user in the life of the library. The idea here is that we should sort of flip the context of what we would sort of normally assume. And so in this case, I think this works really good for a linked data context, because I think of it as, let's situate a work from our collection within all data about its creator, not just what we know. And I find that to be sort of very interesting. It's a bit of a sort of humility factor for libraries to sort of think, we have these great catalogs. I agree that we have some of the absolute best, most robust description in our MARC catalogs ever, but there is definitely more data points about these authors that the rest of the world knows, because we're focused so much on the things that are actually in our collections. So that's sort of what we're doing. I do just want to sort of end up with a couple of notes about some of the critical examinations that we've done of this data. Some of these, again, I'll share these slides, so don't feel like you need to sort of read. I'm running at the end, up to the end of my time, I think, so I'll go through this fast. But there are some things we were very concerned about displaying Wikipedia data and bringing all of the related controversies surrounding the kinds of content authoring that happens in Wikipedia and whether or not that aligns itself with the values at our institution. These were some of the things as we were going through those exercises and just sort of pulling up knowledge card after knowledge card, thinking critically about what we're seeing, what is the data, are we really comfortable with this? I'm happy to talk more about this with anyone who's interested. But there are some concerns that you should have, and you should think about the data elements that you're picking very carefully, including those just general descriptions. Other times there's also just generally, we've made some general notes about just lackluster content. Things like, Wallace Stevens' notable works missing the thing which won him the Pulitzer Prize. Or the fact that some of these data sets don't get updated as frequently. And so maybe something like Kehinde Wiley's bio lacks mention of the Obama portrait, which is a very, very significant piece of work for that person. So we did actually develop a mechanism on our campus that if we found a knowledge card that had offensive content, we could sort of very quickly block it from display, kind of add its ID into a sort of non-display list. And we thought that we would have to do that for some of these issues around sort of bias and quality of content. The one thing that came up that recently sort of surprised us was that we had an author of a book, one of our own faculty members in our medical school looked up his own work in the catalog and the knowledge card said he's dead, in which case he got in touch with the medical library and told us he certainly was not dead. And this was a case where there is a mismatch in the algorithmic merging of data that comes to people with the same name, same profession on the VOF side, that we noticed the same as assertion. I'm not sure exactly which ontology it came from, but it simply is wrong. And so there are these things that you do want to think about, and you do want to think about the sort of mitigation strategies if you go forward with something like this. So launching the feature in your catalog, you're probably not done simply by doing it, but you have to be ready to respond to the data. So that's it for what I've got to talk about. I will stop sharing and turn it over to the last presenter.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'm Katie Lam from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Today, I will mainly demonstrating the linked data capability of our institutional repository. It's different from the Elmer Primo library catalog, summon discount thing. But the institutional repository, this set of data is actually quite important in the library, and they share lots of the common characteristics of MARC record, of bibliographic records, and so on. So let's start. Our institutional repository, we call it SPD, actually is not just the research output. We also have profile of our faculty members. You can consider this as an authority record of the author of the research output. And in last year, we start also harvesting funding data, funding information from Web of Science, and also open access policy data from Sherpa Romeo. So when we're doing this harvesting, we took the opportunity to revamp the data set and convert it into linked data. We hope that by having it in more structured linked data with URIs and all this actionable link will make the institutional repository more discoverable, and so on and so forth. So we decided to use schema.org, which is actually a very popular vocabulary for structured data. Lots of people are using it, and it's an open community developed project, and attempts to cover everything. So this is quite good. These are the schema.org types that's being used in the SPD, and this is some of the statement. For example, this URI, the research output, has an author of another of the profile of a faculty profile. So another URI. So the property here is the schema property, and these are the work, the types in schema.org. These are the capability, linked data capability currently implemented in SPD. I will start showing, demonstrating these features. First of all, I mentioned that we have used schema.org to model the data. We actually used only schema.org in the schema in the data for all these types, and we build a triple store, and we make it linked open data so that machines can go in openly and using the Sparkle query to retrieve whatever triples they want to, the machine want to retrieve. And in order to help people, human beings, to understand all this, we created this Sparkle query form. So showcases use cases show how we can construct the Sparkle query and in different perspective, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of use cases here. And for example, if we want to retrieve all the triples of a graph of a research output, we just copy and paste here and go. Then the program will construct the Sparkle query, which is here, and then run the command, run the query, and retrieve the triples related to this research output, this graph. Okay. You can view it in table form, but if you want, you can look at it in a more interesting way, visualize it. And here you are. This is the research output in linked data using the schema .org vocabulary. And you can see from here, there are two authors, and also is, for example, is part of the where's the it's part of this issue, journal issue, and this journal issue is part of this journal, and this journal actually have a Romeo open access policy data in it. So like if you click on the double click, you will retrieve the graph of this author, of this profile. And you see that he actually has a Wikidata item with the Q number harvested into the profile, and so on and so forth. Let's go back. If you click on this Romeo, you see the modeling of the Romeo data, the policy data in schema.org, and all this kind of thing. Okay, let's go back. We finished that part of Sparkle querying thing. For the discovery in the front end user interface, let me go to another slide. We actually embed the linked data in schema.org in the format of JSON-LD into the web page of the item or the profile. This will help the search engines to understand the content more easily because it's structured, and by doing so, there's a higher chance that the search engine will be able to rank the page at a higher position in the search results. So this is what we call the search engine optimization. Another discovery thing, we bring in enriched data as long as we find it in the linked data. For example, these two pieces of information, the funding information and the open access article icon, actually are populated or enriched from the JSON-LD and so on. Another discovery thing, when you retrieve a profile, it actually will go to the issue a Sparkle query to the triple store to retrieve the data related to the timeline, to the publication timeline, and generate this chart. So let's see it. Click on this profile, then you will see that it's try to crunch and then immediately retrieve the metadata, the linked data from the triple store to formulate, to create this. So we bring in data from the triple store to enrich the profile page. You actually see that this profile, he is actually our past president, has a Wikidata page, and this ID are actually harvested from the Wikidata page. And in fact, we can also construct the discovery with Wikidata page. Let me show it in a different page, in a different person. So this guy, this is the discovery with Wikidata. So these are data that we retrieve from Wikidata. Let's go to this page first. So here we are, and showing the Wikipedia article link where he educated, the award he have, the doctoral advisor, his students, and so on and so forth. Interesting enough, when we do this project, we, as a byproduct, were able to generate an interesting thing, academic genealogy, based on the advisor in the Wikidata database, dataset, open dataset. So let's click and see how it looks like. Okay, so it generates this very interesting chart or trees of this professor, right? So he is his doctoral advisor, and this guy is his, and so on and so forth. By networking all this advisor, you build the academic genealogy of this professor. You can find some very big name here. I don't know where. For example, Gauss, right, and so on and so forth. You actually can click on the photo, double click on it to go to the Wikipedia item. Okay. This. So this is my last slide. Converting the scholarly output metadata to structured data is just a small part of the ongoing trend of transitioning bibliographic metadata to linked data. And I think with this transition, the new normal of our librarians, metadata librarians, will be quite different. Karen, in her OCLC research report in 2020 last year, actually have a very good discussion on transitioning next generation of to the next generation of metadata. And in this report, the very first session is on transitioning to linked data. So I guess many of you already have read it. So my last comment, the metadata librarians' behavior or the way of doing things might be very different after we transition to linked data. Instead of describing the bibliographic resources in MAT, this kind of string-based, you'll be using linked data capable vocabularies. And when you describing the resources, you no longer need typing the text string. You actually will do lookup URIs through external linked open data sources. And one more is that currently when you do authority control, you have to be very careful about the preferred terms or preferred name. But in linked data environment, you actually don't need to have this kind of restriction. You should be able to assign as many URIs as you think is relevant in the description from multiple linked data sources. Okay, so that's all from me for now. Thank you. So I'll close the sharing.
All right, well, thank you very much, TJ, Steve, and KT for those presentations. We did publish advertise the question document before the presentations, and a few came in, and I've noticed that a few were entered during these presentations, and I did copy a couple from the chat over there. So I'm going to switch over to that Google Doc, which again is, sorry, too many screens open. And I'll just ask go through the questions in the order they were asked. The first one here is, given that much of the metadata for e-resources emanates from content providers in ONIX format, should we be working with the publishing industry to enrich their content standard, which is a native XML format? Now we'll open that to any of the panelists that has the thought on this. Or if this stymies all three of you, we can open it to the audience and phone a friend.
Phone a friend, please. If the original question, if the person who submitted the question is here, I think I don't understand. Is it ask them to enhance with linked data in particular? Is there a particular sort of use case in mind?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, I'm the person who put that question up. It's Jane Daniels here from Wales in the UK. My observations on this really stem from the fact that we see an awful lot of duplicated effort in the metadata workflows at the moment. So you've got the publishers using an ONIX standard, which is native XML. And then you've got the knowledge base providers and the record vendors converting the ONIX feeds into MARC, which then has to be republished as MARC XML in the discovery layers. This all gets trammeled up in an awful lot of duplicated effort globally. And it just occurs to me that could we be in some ways cutting out a lot of this duplicated effort and certainly doing away with a lot of the delays that we see, and possibly the additional expense that all this entails as well. I think we all want to see linked data used widely. The presentations now have just proved that conclusively it is the way for us to go. But we are not the only ones with the metadata. And as a lot of the commercial resources that we purchase, that the metadata is coming from the publishers. So I just wonder if there isn't a good case now for us to sit around the table with the publishing industry and look at what's in ONIX, what's in MARC, and what could we put into ONIX that is derived from MARC, so that we're not having to do all this kind of enrichment of MARC records. Is there a way forward on that?
I think there is definitely an option that if the originator, the beginning creator of the content of the resources can actually do it in linked data in a format that is acceptable for consumption in the catalog. And by doing so, we don't need to convert from one format to another format and then back to another format and so on and so forth. So this actually, I think in the old day when we were talking about the CIP cataloging in publication thing, so we want the publisher to actually, when they publish already format it into a MARC format, library metadata format and so on. So if we are talking about linked data, we probably can have this kind of initiative. I don't know about ONIX, whether they already have this kind of thinking that to create their data in linked data format. It can be in schema.org, it can be in BitFrame, it can be any format, any linked data format, structured data. Yeah.
I'll just add that, so based on our experience using linked data, I have been coming around to a thought that essentially linked data works great as almost a lingua franca, a kind of universal communication, which is, given that the ontologies can be sort of referenced on the web themselves, they can be sort of, in some sense, sort of self-documenting. I think that the notion that maybe publishing schemas in an RDF form as a way to sort of encourage everybody to sort of speak one language in transmission and give individual applications and individual data consumers their own opportunity to use the data modeling that suits their particular use cases. I have a hard time thinking that we will get total consensus on a single sort of metadata format ever. So I think going back to the almost on some level the original notion of MARC, which is as a transmission format, less than originally not so much as a cataloging format. I think that linked data could sort of serve a function like that and enable sort of the communication and then the consumption, enable more consumption of diverse, discrete, remote data sources that can then be sort of put to work in a much more heterogeneous data environment.
It seems to me, I don't know what individuals or organizations would have leverage with the publishing industry. That what we might aim for first, just as we're doing with MARC, is can data elements be introduced that would contain URIs for real world objects, or URIs that point to linked data that has a relationship to what the publisher's publishing. That would at least allow better translation and more information to come through to the MARC, which could then be transformed into DibFrame or whatever linked data configuration schema the libraries wanted to use, or I should say the information organization wanted to use. That's not as good as having everything in linked data from Onyx, but it would be perhaps a start, so that if our bibliographic descriptions are based on publisher data, whether it's Onyx or some other internal format that's been converted to Onyx or something, publishers that start to look at making it ready to become more of that universal communication format like you're talking, Steve.
Thank you, Laura and panelists. I'm going to move us on to the next question, because we have a number of questions, and I suspect more questions than we can actually get through. The next one that was asked, if I can just summarize it briefly, is that if linked data is the basis of the semantic web, and that means that information is structured in a way that computers can draw relationships between resources, what then does it take for ALMA or Primo to enable computers and people to work in cooperation? And what does it take for ALMA or Primo to enable computers to draw relationships between resources? This seems like one of the fundamental questions of the whole the whole thing. Is it the chicken or the egg? What do you think?
Well, so one thing I'd suggest is that with the kinds of things we could do with linked data in discovery, there is a very, very critical set of decisions to make about what metadata, what attributes do we want to bring into our environment. Like, and some are just very simple. What is actually relevant to a researcher of, at my institution or my patrons? And maybe it's different for public libraries or academic libraries or special libraries. And so on some level, this notion, computers and humans sort of working a little more cooperatively is actually saying, does cataloging become more of a process of algorithm design in how these crawls happen in the way that we're trying to sort of present it today? How do you make decisions without knowing what you're going to get up front? Because these are those knowledge cards, while we cache them, they do happen initially in real time. And so what are we comfortable with doing? And I think that's a very interesting opportunity for cataloging and public service to sort of think about in libraries.
Yeah, I think computer and people have been working together For example, in the old terminology, we call computer aided or computer assisted things like workflow or whatever. And in this newer approach, we may call it robo advisor. You know, a computer helping you to something to do some algorithm and then advise you in different types of things. So in terms of Elmer Primo discovery, this is a very good opportunity for the computer to crunch the big data, the linked data, the data behind, and then recommend or advise things in Elmer, in Primo, in Discovery, whatever. Yeah. So this is actually the goal of one of the goal of this linked data approach. By doing so, the machine can interpret the structured data so that they can add on it and do whatever data mining, discovery, recommendation, all this kind of thing. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm going to summarize the next question, and I hope I don't lose too much of the nuance of it in the process. So please forgive me, whoever asked it, if I don't quite ask the question in the full way that it was asked. But in short, the questioner notes that Primo is very limited in what URIs or URLs it stores in the PNX, and these are mainly those that link to content somewhere, like the 856 field. There is no way to capture the relationships to aspects of the description that we already see embedded in our MARC records. What can be done so that we can take advantage of these relationships and identifiers to better describe and navigate our resources, as well as access more information from other sources, to enrich Primo to become more than just a catalog list, but a true research tool? I'm sorry, there were no easy questions. If we've stumped the panelists, I'm happy to entertain thoughts from the audience.
Ken, I think this is really questions probably require lots of thinking. Maybe we can answer this and then share the answers through the listserv. Then we can move to next question, because this is a wonderful, excellent question. I think it does require a lot of thinking and to make a meaningful answer.
Okay, yeah, we can certainly move along. The next, is there anyone here using Primo's search engine optimization feature using sitemaps to allow search engines to crawl a version of our bibliographic records that contains metadata, potentially in linked data format? Any observations on the benefits or improvements needed? This could actually be a yes/no question if you skip the second one.
So I know at UC Davis, we implemented this feature, but it's by our digital application group. And I think I occasionally ask, did we actually attract a lot of traffic from the web? I think the ones I mentioned, so far we haven't, because there's a couple of reasons. One, most of our data are description. They're not really contain the sort of like a link, linking a way computer can understand. So that's why I think Google basically skip those most of the time. So far we haven't really had a very sort of a good use of this, but mainly because our data isn't really linked data per se. It's just published as a linked data, but bunch of description. So King, as you said, is a chicken egg situation, right? Do you want to build the science first and then can be used, but then somebody wanted you to demonstrate the use before you can actually build? So it's like, which one should come first?
And we are at time. I think this is I think a really important question. I just want to point out Steve Meyer's comment in the chat that we should also think about what we want to do. So the advice is to keep the user story work going and to think creatively. In other words, dream new features up. And yes, I think that's exactly right. It may be a chicken and an egg, but somebody gets to create the incubator where so the egg can eventually hatch wherever it comes from. I hope I will invite the panelists to add their thoughts into the question document after this session, if they have any, to try to answer those. And as Xiaoli Li noted, we will share then the summary of that out to the listserv in a few days when we've had a chance to digest. And I welcome anyone on the panel or in the audience to add their thoughts as well, either to the document or just pose questions in the listserv. That would be great. I want to thank our three panelists, TJ, Steve, and KT, for their presentations and time today. And thank all of you in the audience for attending and participating so interestedly. I think that will wrap us up for the day. We will make the recording available as well. And thank you again for attending today's town hall.
Thank you, Ken, for the wonderful facilitation.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.